So prevention, is that the answer? Is it preventable? Is obesity a preventable disease or not? There are many things that are associated with obesity. We know that genetics, epigenetics are of importance, viruses can be of importance, the microbiota can be of importance, stress and sleep disorders and socioeconomic factors, as we heard Annika talk about before, and drugs are of importance. All these factors can affect the risk to become obese. But what is very important to remember is that all these are risk factors. You don't become obese because you eat glucocorticoids, for example. So that's not a single calorie in that. It's something else. It's what you eat and what you drink and if you reduce your physical activity. And many of these risk markers are also possible to work with from a preventive perspective. So we think it should be possible to prevent obesity. But it is very difficult, as we all know. If you want to do something, you have to work with two things. You can try to increase the physical activity, and you can decrease the energy intake. When we discuss this with politicians, you know what they will say. We shall go for the physical activity. That's positive. That's nice. But if you say that you should reduce the energy intake, it's depressive. It's not nice. So they directly go to the physical activity. So the question is that important for obesity prevention? Is it as important as we think it is? Well, in my opinion, it's not. We know, as Annika also pointed out, that obesity is much more common among poor socioeconomic groups, 3 times more common compared to other groups in Stockholm and Sweden. And that's also shown in other countries where they also have looked at the physical activity with objectively measures. And then you can see that despite that, the obesity prevalence is much higher. There is no difference in the physical activity between socioeconomic groups. And that is surprising for many, because self-reported by the families, there are big differences. But if you really measure it with the accelerometry, there are no differences. So for me, this indicates that physical activity is not of any major importance for obesity prevention. This is a slide showing the association between physical activity and BMI in 6 to 9-year-old children. And as you can see, there is a highly statistical significance. But for me, the clinical importance of this association is very poor. So physical activity is not the key. And it's very difficult to alter that. We tried that in a randomized study called Stockholm Obesity Prevention Project. And the teachers said that they really increased the physical activity with 30 minutes per day. And all things that could reduce physical activity were banned in the after-school health care centers. But we could not see any differences. So it's very hard to affect physical activity. To decrease energy intake, is that possible? Well, in the same study, we banned all sweets at school and after-school health care, after-school health centers. And no celebrations with sweets at all. And no sweet soft drinks were allowed in packed lunches and things like that. And we were extremely strict. The school didn't like it at first, but after a couple of years, they accepted this. And interestingly, we could see that we could affect the obesity prevalence when we compare intervention and control schools. So in the intervention schools, we could see that there was a decline in overweight prevalence. And at the same time, there was an increase in the control schools. So it was possible, really, to influence this if you ban all sweets. Is that enough? What happens at home? This was a school intervention. It was not focused on the parents. But interestingly, we could see that in the intervention schools, the children had different eating patterns at home, despite that we did not argue for that with the parents. So we think that when you do things in school and daycare centers, that will affect the eating habits at home, at least in some families. Because what we could see that the eating patterns were different in families with low socioeconomic status. There we could see that what happened in school influenced their eating habits. So it is possible to do things at school. If you want to prevent earlier than at school time, it's tough because you really don't know what to do. How shall we intervene with 1-year-olds, for example? We could see, and there are studies going on, both general and targeted prevention, but the data are not there yet. But we know that there are issues that we really don't understand, because we know that genetics is of importance for obesity. If you look at children who have a cluster of SNPs associated with obesity, they will have an increased weight, at least, already after a couple of months after birth. But if you look at children who have obese parents, we think that it is the genes that will affect the obese parents, that they will get obese children. But it's not the whole truth, because they will not become obese when they are young. They will become obese later. The association between parental obesity and childhood obesity is coming much later, between 3 and 15 years of age, not as early as the obesity genes. And this is a little bit odd. When we look at growth during the first year, we can see that parental education affects the growth during the first year. But we don't know exactly how the children know that their parents have a low education. We don't understand, we can't see when we try to measure food intake and eating patterns, we can't see any differences. It's very uniform in Sweden. But we can see this. But parental obesity did not affect the growth during the first year. And physical activity, there are no differences whatsoever when we look at that in 2-year-olds. There's no association between obesity, there's no association between parental obesity. We can't see anything. So if you want to intervene, we have to do it a little bit blinded in this group. But if we can conclude, I would say that in public places, at schools and after-school care centers, all sweets should be banned. I think that is something that we really can show will have an impact. I think if we shall do something with young children, I think we should stress and put more effort to help children in low socioeconomic areas with more support at the healthcare centers. That's what I think we should do. Thank you.